Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tom Cashon, the Public Safety Manager for the Golden Rain Foundation. And I want to thank everyone for being here for Rossmoor's second monthly presentation on wildfire safety. A big thank you again to PG&E for last month's excellent presentation. In California, we have seen devastating fires over the past years. Experts are relating it to many things, including California's long-term drought, global warming, poor forestry management, and the need for safer practices. This is why Golden Rain Foundation has brought you this series of wildfire safety presentations throughout the fire season. This year's fire season is expected to be very bad. For this month's presentation, I reached out to the Contra Costa County Fire Protection District, also known as CONFIRE. You'll hear me say CONFIRE, and that's what I'm pertaining it to. I asked them to put on their very popular wildfire safety program, and they agreed to do so. You'll find this program extremely valuable in helping you and our community prepare for a wildfire situation. I am very pleased they are here as they are the experts in the field. We also have an expanded panel of experts to help answer questions that may fall outside of CONFIRE's responsibility. Before I introduce all of our panel, I want to give Golden Rain Foundation CEO Tim O'Keefe a chance to speak to all of us. Tim?
Thanks, Tom. So welcome, everybody. I'm looking at the head count here. We have over 300 people in attendance, so this is a great turnout today. I want to thank you, Tom, for setting this up. Contra Costa Office of Emergency Services, City of Walnut Creek Police Department, Rossmoor EPO, and of course the Contra Costa Fire Protection District for participating here today. You know, the extraordinary fires that we've had in California over the last few years have elevated everyone's concern about the possibility of fire in and around Rossmoor. Golden Rain Foundation and the Rossmoor Mutuals are committed to safety preparedness and spend tens of thousands of dollars every year mitigating the risk to the community and encouraging residents to do all that they can to be prepared. We just had an announcement, I think it was yesterday or the day before, on Nixle that we were disking, which is a process to basically turn over and grind up the grasses on our hillsides to create a fire break. The wildfires up and down the state in recent years have required homeowners, businesses, municipalities, and fire departments to more carefully evaluate fire risk in communities. In 2018 and 2019, there were 3 wildfires that encroached into Rossmoor that were caused by wild animals interacting with PG&E equipment. So we know that the Rossmoor community is not immune to the danger. We had PG&E here, as Tom noted, last month to discuss their vegetation management and wildfire safety programs. In January, just a year ago, following a year-long effort, Golden Rain updated its emergency operations plan to specifically address wildfire and work closely with the Contra Costa Fire Protection District, the city, the county, EPO, CERT, and Red Cross to be better prepared in the event that evacuations were required in Rossmoor. We've learned through these processes that wildfire management and evacuation planning are 2 of the 3 very important elements, but the third is individual preparation. And I want to take this opportunity to remind everybody once again that Rossmoor's Emergency Preparedness Organization has outstanding resources on their website that assist Rossmoor residents in their planning for preparation for evacuation and wildfire. We're pleased that CONFIRE, the county and the city, have agreed to conduct today's event and to demonstrate their ongoing commitment to keeping communities safe. So with that, let's listen and learn how the Fire Protection District is protecting Contra Costa and Rossmoor. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tim. And to add to what Tim was talking about regarding all the other partners that we partner with, the Golden Rain Foundation continues to work very closely, not only with Contra Costa County Fire Protection District, but we also work with the Rossmoor Emergency Preparedness Organization, our very own EPO, City of Walnut Creek's Rossmoor CERT team, the ham radio and CB groups that are here in Rossmoor, City of Walnut Creek, the Walnut Creek Police Department, Contra Costa County Office of the Sheriff, the Office of Emergency Services, Lafayette Police Department, Contra Costa County Animal Services, PG&E, East Bay Municipal Water District, Red Cross, and many others. And we do this to better prepare our community for the myriad of emergencies that could occur here. I would like to introduce our expert panel, then hand over the presentation to CONFIRE. Today we have from Contra Costa County Fire Protection District, Captain George Lang, Fire Inspector Chris Giddis, Fire Inspector Taylor King, Fire Education Coordinator Noel Cross, From the City of Walnut Creek, we have Deputy City Manager Carla Hansen. From Walnut Creek Police Department, we have Lieutenant Tony Mangini and Sergeant Ryan Hibbs. From Contra Costa County Office of the Sheriff, Office of Emergency Services, Manager Rick Kovar, and Community Warning System Manager Heather Tiernan. From Golden Rain Foundation, we obviously have CEO Tim O'Keefe, Landscape Manager Rebecca Palong, and myself. And lastly, Rossmoor's very own rock star Emergency Preparedness Organization President Fran Gibson. They are all here to answer any questions that may fall into their respective roles. Speaking of questions, after Confire's presentation, we will have time for question and answers. If you want to submit a question, you need to select the Q&A, not the chat. Please don't use the chat. Select the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom window and write your question and submit it. This can be done throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will answer the submitted questions. For time's sake, we will not be doing in-person questions. You'll have to submit your questions via the Q&A button. This wildfire safety presentation will cover wildland fire behavior, defensive space, home hardening, grab and go kits, evacuation plans, fire safety terms like red flag warnings, like you saw recently, evacuation warnings, evacuation orders, shelter in place orders, etc. Community wildfire alerts and apps, manual garage door opening and garage door backup batteries, and working home smoke alarms and functioning fire extinguishers, to name a few. We all hope at the end of this presentation, you'll be more aware, better educated, and that Rossmoor will be even safer. So with that, shall we get started? Captain, you want to kick us off?
I would like to thank Tom and the community of Rossmoor for inviting the Fire District to present this information. This is a timely presentation for the community of Rossmoor and all our threatened communities. We've had early season red flag days, the first red flag day event in May that extended 4 days. We're at or approaching historically low fuel moistures, and the combined elements of wildfire risk are all present, and we hope to provide information that'll be useful to the community and residents at Rossmoor to help understand how to reduce risks and to improve their own life safety. My name is George Lang. I'm the captain for our Community Risk Reduction Unit. That's a new unit within the Contra Costa Fire Prevention Bureau. Within Community Risk Reduction are our Public Education Unit headed by Noel Cross, who you'll hear shortly, and our Weed Abatement and Exterior Hazard Control Divisions, which have Inspector Chris Giddis as the Exterior Hazard Control Division Coordinator, and Inspector Taylor King discussing Defensible Space and our FireWise programs. So I will now turn it over to Inspector Taylor King.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Taylor King. I'm with the Contra Costa County Fire Protection District as the fire inspector. This picture right here that we're looking at now is West Contra Costa County from Wildcat Canyon overlooking the East Richmond Heights. This is just one example of, the wildland urban interface and what our very high fire hazard severity zones can look like within our county. And it's a good example. So a fire hazard severity zone is a mapped area that designated zones based on certain factors such as fuel, slope, and fire weather, with varying degrees of fire hazard as well, moderate, high, and very high. So while fire hazard severity zones don't necessarily predict when or where a wildfire will occur, they do identify areas where wildfire hazards can be more severe and therefore of a greater concern. You guys are not located directly within a very high fire hazard severity zone. However, the community of Rossmoor is surrounded by it. So we have that. So they are meant to limit damage to structures through planning, prevention, and mitigation activities and requirements that can help overall reduce the risk. All right, so this is just another picture of the wildland urban interface. The wildland urban interface is the transition between uncontrolled vegetation in our open spaces and the urbanized areas, typically our single family structures or our residential neighborhoods. I keep trying this thing, there we go. So our urban interface fire problem, in the simplest terms, the wildland urban interface is any point where our fuel feeding a wildfire changes from our natural wildland vegetation to our man-made urban fuel. The interface can be a single spot in any building where fire can enter. So if this point is vulnerable and unattended, fire may then propagate inside of the house. And for this to happen, wildland fire must be close enough for its flying brands or flames to contact flammable parts of our structures. So that single spot can be tree litter or pine needles on the roof or in the gutters or any pile of dead and dying debris and vegetation that's along the exterior of our homes. Yeah, okay, so awesome. That's another picture over here, kind of looking at another very high fire hazard severity zone. This is the Hills of Martinez, kind of looking westbound. So why is the wildland urban interface a concern for me? And that's because, the interface areas where wildland fires are igniting, numbers of homes and making that transition from wildland fuels to, man-made structures and becoming an urban conflagration. And that's what we definitely want to avoid. All right. So this picture right here that I got is exactly just that. In short, our conflagration, conflagration is a large fire that which destroys a great deal of land and property. In this picture, we're looking at structure-to-structure ignition. So vegetation may have been what caused this fire to begin with from the beginning. So vegetation on fire spreading to our structures, and then our structures, therefore, through radiant heat or other flying brands or, direct flame impingement catching other structures on fire as well. So that's a good picture of structure-to-structure ignition. All right. So to kind of better understand what we're up against, we got to give you guys a crash course in the basics of fire behavior. So oxygen, heat, and fuel are frequently referred to as the fire triangle, which has then been upgraded to a tetrahedron because of the chemical chain reaction process that's also needed. So it's important to note that if we take away any one of these things, oxygen, heat, fuel, or that chemical chain reaction, then we've essentially extinguished our fire. So those four things must be present in the same time and in the proper amount in order to produce and sustain fire. And that is enough oxygen to sustain combustion, enough heat to raise any material to its ignition temperature. The ignition temperature is the lowest temperature at which a combustible substance, when heated, takes fire and continues to burn. So we need some sort of fuel or combustible material. And then lastly, that chemical exothermic reaction, that's fire. Exothermic is the process or reaction that releases energy to its surroundings, usually in the form of heat. All right, so just like our fire tetrahedron, right, the wildland fire triangle is another big one here. So just like our previous slides, wildland fires are broken down into three elements, right? Fuel, weather, and topography. Along with those three elements, there are three fuel categories. We have ground fuels, surface fuels, and crown fuels. Our ground fuels are all combustible material that is below the surface. So for example, tree and shrub roots, any kind of root that's below our surface level. Our surface fuels are going to be needles, leaves, grass, any dead and down branches or debris, the stumps themselves, shrubs and short trees, anything generally under 6 feet in height. Our crown fuels are suspended up above the ground into the treetops or other vegetation, and that's going to be 6 feet and above. Another big one right here is going to be weather. A few things with the weather that we need to be aware of is relative humidity. And that relative humidity is the amount of moisture in the air divided by the amount of moisture that air could hold when saturated at the same temperature. It's usually expressed in a percentage and can range from anywhere between 1 being very dry to 100% being very moist. Low relative humidity is an indicator of high fire risk. Along with that is temperature. Temperature and relative humidity have an inverse relationship. So when temperature increases, our relative humidity will decrease. And then when our temperature decreases, our relative humidity will generally increase. Wind is another big factor as well. Wind is not actually the most critical weather element affecting wildland fire behavior. So the most difficult to predict and the most variable in both time and location, and actually needs to be constantly monitored. So the effects that wind have on wildland fires are increasing oxygen supply to that fire, can determine the direction and the fire spread. It increases the drying of our fuels and carries those fire brands and embers aloft ahead of the main fire, and influences the amount of fuel consumed. As well, we have topography down there, slope, aspect, and our geographical features. The aspect is the direction toward which slopes face. This is going to be your north, south, and east directions. Our driest slopes are generally our south and our southwestern aspects. Slope is another big one. Ratio over rise over run, height over distance expressed in a percentage. Layman term is how steep it is. Fires generally move a lot faster and easier on inclined slopes than it does on a descending slope. Doesn't mean that it won't happen. Fire definitely will go downhill if the conditions are right. Our geographical features, vary from hills, valleys, ridges, saddles, depressions, just to name a few. Draws and spurs are another ones. In that picture over there, you kind of get an example of all of them. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hand this slide off here to my colleague.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Giddis, Fire Inspector, Weed Abatement Coordinator for Contra Costa County Fire Department. So I'm speaking to you on this because it's a little bit what we're out there trying to do and stop. So as you'll see this first slide here, we're looking at what they call ladder fuels. So the ladder fuels under fire conditions, as it says, these can be carried. These are these small, the weeds that you see, down shrub, brush, things of that nature that tend to ignite faster than the larger fuels and spread much quicker. When we're referencing ladder fuels, what we're really referencing is the combustible material that then can ignite and then travel towards these larger either shrubs, trees, low-hanging branches, thus creating basically a ladder that allows that fire to reach into the tree. And as it begins to reach those aerial fuels, it becomes a crowning. So it's in the top of the trees now, and it can move along that way. It becomes a much different consideration when firefighting. It becomes something that, firefighters, it makes it very difficult for them to fight that fire. So part of what we do in the weed abatement is we're looking to mitigate as much of those light flashy fuels as possible by inspections, notifications, and I'll go over the standards with you when we get to them here, just to kind of give you an idea of what we look for when we're doing these inspections and what we would like to see taken care of. And then just kind of get as much volunteer as we can from the community and help them understand why we are concerned with the weeds, not necessarily for aesthetics or anything but actual abatement of these weeds and the reason why. So with that, I will go ahead and move to the next slide here. So this is just kind of, again, a nice visual to see. I wouldn't say nice based off the circumstances, but it gives you a better understanding as you see that top picture there. As you can see, the surface fuels, those are your light flashy fuels that are on the ground floor. And then as they go, the ladder fuels are what allows that distance to be covered from those light surface fuels up into the treetops. And then you'll see at that second slide how the fires got into those ladder fuels. And now it allows it to reach on that last slide all the way into the tree crowns, again, creating that crown fire, which becomes extremely difficult for firefighters to manage. In that lower portion, this is what we're looking to accomplish by mitigation. So, and by mitigation, that just means cleaning it up, getting rid of those small fuels, creating that surface so that, we can't stop fire completely. We can reduce the hazard and the risk as much as possible with this. So the idea is by keeping those fires on the surface, it gives us much more time to respond. We can control the fire at a better opportunity to put the fire out and protect structures. So again, that's the importance of what we do here at the department during the season with the weed abatement and mitigation. So here you'll see, and I'll start and I'll go through these and kind of give an idea. So we give out a notice to certain residents who are have had notices in the past or vacant lots. Those tend to be our more challenging areas where they're not maintained. So this goes out every year. We send it out to the residents and give them a certain amount of time to meet these standards. So the first one there is generally for a lot of the parcels and owners that we deal with. So parcels that are 5 acres or less in size, we actually require that all the abatement guidelines be met. So first and foremost, we want all the weeds down to 3 inches. Primarily why we ask that is what we discussed with the ladder fuels. What we'd like to see is them down to 3 inches because it's relative to the flame height. And I think we'll speak a little bit on there, but ideally you can basically times it by 3 and that's approximately how high that flame would be. So if we allowed 4-foot weeds to be, stay without abatement, you have a possibility of a 12-foot flame, which at that point, you could have that easily reaching into the ladder fuels and aerial fuels. So we also ask that you get any, when weed abatement is done, either rake, mulch, or remove completely any of the debris. That also helps in getting rid of any combustible material that's created by doing the actual weed abatement. We also look at combustible rubbish, trash that's left there, It's not limited to just, it can be all kinds of stuff. We even, down branches, depending upon the diameter, but small branches, leaves, tree litter, all those things are things we look at and consider as the weed abatement process goes on and reducing transmission from the surface fuels into the aerial fuels. We have a different standard for the larger areas. So you might see we get calls, around golf courses, those type of things. Anything 5 acres or more is only required to it has a perimeter around the parcel, and then what we call cross breaks. So basically, it allows us to sorry, I'm not getting that word. Compartmentalize. Sorry, that was tough one to get out. I don't know why. Usually it goes smoother than that. Anyway, we're making the simplest thing is we're creating sections, and what those sections allow us to do is slow down the head of the fire and give the firefighters an opportunity to then fight the fire from a position. So it does that by reducing the surface fuels and slowing down the rate at which they can spread from one portion of that parcel into the next portion of the parcel. So basically, we're just creating it's a small wall or a horizontal wall between them to slow that fire down in order for us to get there. So sometimes when you look at it, you may drive by someplace and be like, wow, there's so many weeds still there. But what you look for is that area around that property, and that's what we're looking for. Again, that gives us the opportunity to stop that fire. And we have, some people can mow and require a large distance, approximately 60 feet. You'll find with a lot of the larger parcels, they do what they call disking. It was mentioned, I believe, by Tim, where they're turning up the dirt. That's a very efficient way to do it. And we allow for a 30-foot perimeter and then 15 feet for the cross breaks that we were just discussing. We also, you can see, we do require from the roadways, we try to keep an eye on 10 feet horizontally. What that means is the distance from the street to the 10 feet into where it might reach into a property, or depending upon who owns that property, as well as clearance for our vehicles. So our engines, our trucks, 13'6" requirement in regards to clearing with our engines and our apparatus. With active pasture land, because you have animals on there, we do allow for a little less in the cross fuel breaks. So you may see that out there. So if you see farm animals, they're doing the job for us and for their owners. So we give them a little bit of a difference, and we will monitor that up till the end of August to make sure that the animals are doing it correctly. So we'll switch here. So we talked about the 30-foot fuel breaks. Mode fuel breaks, really the biggest thing. And then we just kind of look at the quality of the work. So it's not just that people are doing it, it's that they're doing it correctly and to meet the point of what we're trying to do again, which is stop those small surface fuels and create time for us to get out there and do what we're supposed to do and help fight that fire. So this is pretty simple to remember: lean, clean, and green. We talked about the flame lengths. So flame length correlates to height of fuel. Again, that's why we go to that 3 inches, or that's the mark that we've set by or not ourselves, but that's what's come through the health and safety code down from the board of supervisors, and that's what we enforce. The highest flame length can anticipate would be 12 inches, depending upon the size of, or what you're, like I said before, if you've got a 3-inch weed versus a 12-inch weed versus a foot, basically about 3 times that. So if it's very dense and tall, it can create a lot of problems, because not only can it get in there, but once it reaches inside that shrubbery, it's reaching some of the dead portions of it and can ignite that much faster. So mitigation and weed abatement kind of correlates with defensible space. So I'm going to speak a little bit on that, and then Inspector King will also as well. Basically, defensible space, it's defined through our ordinance 2019-37. Defensible space is the area within the perimeter of a parcel providing the key point of defense from an approaching wildfire or escaping structure fire. Our department, Confire, strives to minimize the wildlife impact through comprehensive vegetation management services, which is what we're speaking about with mass mailings, the inspections, and vegetation management in general. We address it in all areas. There are certain things specified with dispensable space that helps in very high fire hazard severity zones, which can help prevent or severely limit at least large scale wildfires from developing, spreading to neighborhood parcels. Outlines RC or PRC 4291 and AB 3074 outlines the defensible space clearance requirements. Maintain around buildings and structures from 30 feet to a distance of 100 feet. These guidelines are intended to provide property owners with examples of fuel modification measures that can be used to create a defensible space around buildings or structures, which again correlates, it's kind of a team effort here that correlates back to the weed management and that we were speaking about previously. Defensible space objectives. So this is what we wanted to do. It can be accomplished, like I said, but it's a multi-pronged approach of completing and maintaining our weed abatement, establishing the defensible space guidelines, and integrating ignition resistant building construction when time to upgrade homes. So it's basically allowing us, or you help us and we help you. So we work together as a team. So that's what defensible space for us is. And that's what we're promoting out there. So with that being said, I will pass it back to Inspector King, and he'll speak a little bit more about defensible space.
All right. All right, so this is kind of a great picture over here from our first zone. That first zone is from the structure itself out to 30 feet. And in that 30 feet, we want to make sure that we're removing all the dead plants, all the dead and dying material, cutting our grasses, doing our weed abatement. We want to make sure that we're lean, clean, and green. We're keeping our tree branches 10 feet away from the chimneys and the roofs if possible. That second zone that we can kind of see in that picture there, that's going to be from that 30 feet to 100 feet. But if you can't necessarily maintain that 100 feet, then it needs to go to the property line itself. And then obviously the neighbor is going to be the same way. So essentially we'll make up that 100 feet. So that zone 2 is once again doing our weed abatement, making sure that we cut our grasses that 3 inches or less. We're also making sure that we eliminate our ladder fuels. We're creating and maintaining horizontal and vertical spacings with our shrubs, plant species, and trees. It's got some good notes there on the bottom there for equipment use, right? We want to make sure that we're mowing before 10 a.m. and never on hot, windy, low relative humidity days or any red flag days either. All right, so our Contra Costa County Fire Protection District guidelines for defensible space just kind of went over this a little earlier. 0 to 5 feet is essentially going to be a non-combustible zone. It's going to need to be ember resistant in the future. Not yet, but in the upcoming years it will be. Once again, that 0 to 30 foot zone is the most restrictive, removing most of the vegetation with the exception to single specimens, provided that they are well spaced and pruned and maintained. 30 to 100 feet is also the reduced fuel zone or to the property line, where those fuels are spaced and maintained to avoid the transmission of fire, both vertically and horizontally. This is just a good example of kind of defensible space. You guys, the homeowners, you guys are the best and most important person for protecting your guys' house from the wildfire. The fire department is there to protect, life, property, and the environment. However, you guys can do stuff right now to help us help you. Okay, so kind of just touched over this a little bit. The fire department's mission and priority, right, depending upon the circumstances, is life safety first. Once all the life safety issues have been addressed, then we're going to start focusing on structure protection. Fire takes every precaution to help protect you and your family and your property from wildfire. However, a hard truth here, in the majority of wildland fire events, there simply may not be enough resources to go around or for firefighters to be at every home to defend them. So this is why we're going to need you to help us, because if you maintain and create that defensible space, you're making, well, for one, you're thinning out that vegetation and you're reducing that overall fuel load, and you're also creating a safe place for our firefighters to protect your homes and themselves. And this down is just a couple of good looking pictures of it as well. This picture gets around. This is a good example of, defensible space working. And it's also providing a safe environment for our firefighters. So you can kind of see on that left-hand side of the picture, the fire is kind of burned all the way up there to what appears to be kind of a gravel rock area. What that is the fuel continuity stopping. There's that chemical chain reaction. So that's that bare mineral soil, that rock buffer. They also have a concrete driveway that surrounds, and it's also got a nice green belt of vegetation on the inside. So necessarily defensible space doesn't always mean clear cutting everything out and making sure you have 100 feet of absolutely nothing around your property. Proper landscaping and flyerdscaping, I believe is what they call it. You can still have a really nice looking yard without having, with also being fire safe. All right. So Is vegetation management alone enough? And that's going to be no, because historic fire loss patterns have indicated that high winds and low relative humidities are generally going to drive fires through any type of wildland fuel bed. So this is generally why we can't put all of our eggs into that vegetation management basket, so to say. We also need to be able to integrate our defensible space, our weed abatement standards, and our building standards with that ignition resistant construction, which we have gotten better with Chapter 7A of the California Building Code. All right, vegetation management. Again, vegetation management is the trimming, removal, or relocation of trees, shrubs, or other plant material. So fire needs that heat, fuel, and oxygen. Can't do much without it, but we can control the fuels, right? So factors that increase the fire to the risk of structures include that topography, dangerous adjacent vegetation, the roofing type, what we're using for siding. We have combustible decks, walkways, and any sort of opening into our structures, including skylights and windows. So mitigation of these threats means managing, vertical and horizontal continuity of fuels, also known as that fuel ladder, which we talked about earlier. So why is Fire taking such a bold and sweeping approach, I would say? And that's because, well, I'm sure you guys see this too. It's not getting any better, it's getting worse. Right, wildfire events are increasing more with each decade. The suppression cost itself is going up dramatically. We're losing exponentially a lot of homes in the last 50 years, and then the untold amount of just environmental damage alone. Here's a good kind of scary stat here. The last year, August and September, accounted for 5 of the 6 biggest fires in nearly 90 years of recorded history. And that's going to be the August complex of 2020, the Mendocino complex of 2018, SCU complex of 2020, which also affected Contra Costa as well. The Creek Fire of 2020, LNU complex of 2020, the Northern complex of 2020, and I'm sure we've all heard about the Creek Fire, which was Paradise and kind of decimated Butte County and Concow, and I think there's one more town that I'm drawing a blank on. Fiscal year suppression costs are also increasing. From 2016 to 17, suppression costs are around 534 million. 17 to 18 is about 773 million. 2018 to 19 is 890 million. And we're still kind of estimating what's going on with 2019 to 2020, but so far it's being at an estimate of $691 million. All right. So what do we have in this picture right here? So what we have in this picture right here is, what causes buildings to ignite. And there's a lot of things that can cause buildings and structures to ignite. So what we have in this picture right here is structure ignition, kind of an early phase of that conflagration that we went over earlier. Let's just say one of these houses that's, on the screen caught on fire, right? I mean, it could have spread to the other structures as well from either radiant heat from the neighboring house, or if any of the fire, or if any of the actual direct flame is touching another house, that makes it more susceptible as well.
Back again, I practiced some wording, so hopefully I won't mess any up this time. So ember and firebrand exposure. So flying embers, it's a great risk for your home. They can be carried by wind for miles ahead of an actual fire. So the embers land on or near your home, they could easily ignite a nearby vegetation. So some of those light flashy fuels that we keep referring to. Accumulated debris or decks or fences, unmaintained, especially some that have been around for a long time. They also have the potential to enter your home or attic through openings or vents, believe it or not, which can ignite furnishings or any other combustible storage that you may have in areas that you don't generally go in. Any near home ignitions will subject a portion of your home to direct flame contact, which is where flame actually touches your home. Or radiant heat exposure. And we'll talk a little bit going into the next slides about what that is. I know we've used those words a couple times, radiant heat, direct flame impingement, and we'll kind of go over what that is. So what can you guys do to prevent loss due to ember casting? A few things. Use ignition resistant construction if and when the time comes, if you're replacing something. When it's time to upgrade the roof or siding or deck, keep that in mind as something that you could use to help protect your home. We manage any vegetation and any combustible material that's within 5 feet. So that's something that you want to take into consideration that Inspector King was speaking about. Screen your attic vents and openings and gutters with a 1/16 inch non-combustible corrosion resistant metal mesh screens. That'll help keep out those embers that we were just speaking about. Maintain roof gutters. It's easy, especially if you live under certain species of tree. A lot of litter comes and fills up your rain gutters. That's one way for fire to travel relatively easy, believe it or not. And inspect the exterior of your homes for dry rot, gaps, cracks, and wrapping, and take appropriate action if you see one of those issues, an issue with one of those. So radiant heat. So radiant heat is basically the heat waves. They radiate in all directions from the source. The heat waves travel through the air until they're totally or partially absorbed by an object. That object then actually gains the heat and in turn radiates heat from its surface until it reaches an overall ignition temperature. So just the heat from something can radiate out. So again, just as I was speaking on, the radiant heat just can come from a specific area and then radiate to other structures or other sort of vegetation or other combustible items. And simply just the heat without the flame touching it can cause that to ignite. So it's something you consider. It's not just where the flame might go, but that heat source that's created by the fire, where can that go? And then now we talk about, so the direct flame impingement that we keep referencing, the actual touching of the flame to a surface. So majority of structures don't survive this. So once the flame has got to that structure, it could have started from fire, flying embers. It could have started from a small grass or weed fire, ornamental shrubs. If they're in that zone around the home and that flame can directly touch that surface, that's how that fire can transfer in there. So that's what we've been referring to this time as we talk about direct flame impingement. So that's why the importance of defensible space that Inspector King was speaking about comes into play, stopping that direct flame impingement.
All right, so most common vulnerabilities in the home, California Wildland Urban Interface Building Standards here. The vulnerable parts of a structure are the roofs, the eaves and the vents, our exterior walls, our windows, decks, and doors. All right. So what we have here is an unprotected edge, and kind of where those arrows on the left hand are kind of pointing to appear that there's a little bit of a voided space in there where that ember may have landed in between that clay shingle and what looks to be maybe some roofing assembly, if that's appears to be some sort of paper that is underneath there. So ember castings plus these hot and dry winds and then anything combustible within our roofs, right, is kind of a recipe for disaster potentially. Some of the things that we do have going for us here that are pros: the house does appear to be of a stucco material, which is inherently non-combustible, and the clay shingled roofing as well. That doesn't mean that they won't burn. It means that they're going to last a little longer. Vulnerabilities that are still here on this structure itself are the exposed rafter tailings that are underneath on that right-handed side picture there, and our attic vents. Kind of harder to tell. That's going to be on the left hand toward the top there, those attic vents that generally reduce that unwanted moisture that accumulates. All right, so right here we have vents and assemblies. Our attics and crawl space vents, they do serve important functions, and they provide ventilation to remove that unwanted moisture, which can then turn into mold. Adding to this problem as well are things that, we may have combustible materials that we tend to store in these places: cardboard boxes, old clothing, paper, stuff that we just don't want to throw away quite yet. And as these embers enter and can accumulate against them, they can be easily ignited. So it is recommended that, hey, you get with a licensed contractor, you talk about your vents and your crawl space assemblies and whether or not that 1/8 or that 1/16 inch non-combustible, flame resistant, corrosion resistant metal mesh screen will be a benefit to you guys. And these are just great pictures, kind of showing what they are. All right, so our exterior walls, a couple on the fire here. Let's see, that left-handed picture where it says the fire started here. So that's kind of showing a burned out portion behind the exterior siding. So how does that necessarily happen? Within that 0 to 5 foot zone around our homes, we generally like to have vegetation, ornamental or decorative shrubbery. And that could be that receptive fuel bed for these little ember casts to land and ignite. And then once those ignite and they combust and they're on fire, right, they subject a portion of our home to that direct flame impingement again. And there is a small gap between this, behind that, a small gap that's between the siding and the foundation itself. It's called the skirting. And it's usually exposed wood behind that. And it's just very, very thin. It could be less than a half an inch. But what that does is that creates that pathway for that little fire to travel up past the exterior wall and propagate throughout the house from there. So it's recommended that homeowners make sure that you guys, inspect the exterior siding of your guys' homes, your skirting for any dry rot or gaps or cracks, any warping, anything that we previously mentioned before. If, you find any damaged boards that, you look into using that ignition resistant building construction that we've been talking about. Here we go. Exterior windows. These are another big one, right? So when the time comes to replace our windows, we want to consider either using fire-resistant glass or, we make sure that we have non-combustible assemblies. And I say that because, vinyl will melt. If your window assembly melts and your window just happens to fall out because there's nothing holding it, then you have a giant pathway for that fire, whether it's direct flame impingement or whether it's going to be those embers can create that flow path right into your home. And once we have fire in the home, it's going to be hard from there. So once again, take that into consideration. Windows can and do fail during a wildfire. So let's make sure that we use the proper building material for that. Doors and decks. So this one's a little bit trickier here. The door itself, embers casted into that door coupled with our dry hot winds managed to ignite and char a small portion of that door right there before it was extinguished. The one on the right-hand side there, that does appear to be a support beam on the deck that supports the deck. Decks can be scary because under those fire conditions, some people generally store stuff underneath of it. Maybe we have vegetation underneath it or growing dead and dying debris gets blown in underneath of it and we're not taking care of that immediately. So if that does happen to catch on fire, it's going to subject that deck and that support beam to that direct flame or even that radiant heat. And if that back door is one of your egress routes out of your house and you go to take it, and next thing you know, you got fire underneath your deck, you could potentially go falling right through that. So we want to make sure that, once again, we're out there, we're looking at our decks and we're inspecting everything around our house and we're making sure that if and when that time comes, it's time to replace this material, that we use that ignition resistant building construction again. Here's a little stat for you. Firefighters can control about 97% of all the wildfires that start. However, 3% of them overwhelm even the best equipped and well-staffed agencies. So that's when our advanced preparation and doing what we've been talking about was really going to count in crunch time. So at the end here, we have our, if you guys have any questions, here's our emails and our phone number. Thank you for having us. Really, really appreciate it.
For the community of Rossmoor, a lot of the open space areas are mostly grass and they're in some cases rolling grassy hills. And the Golden Rain Foundation does an outstanding job on an annual basis of completing the weed abatement. In addition, a lot of the mutuals and projects within Rossmoor have worked with the fire district and with the Golden Rain Foundation to improve conditions immediately adjacent to structures. So although both Inspector King and Giddis identified that Rossmoor is not in a very high fire hazard severity zone, and therefore wouldn't be required to provide either defensible space or ignition resistant construction, these voluntary measures do improve safety for the community. And the Golden Rain Foundation and the mutuals and projects all do a good job on an annual basis of completing their vegetation management. So we'll change gears a little bit here. I'll be handing it over to our fire education coordinator, Noelle Cross, and she'll be providing some information on emergency preparedness and evacuation planning.
Hi, everybody. How you doing today? Everybody take a big, deep breath. That was a lot of information that just got thrown at you. Thank you, Chris and Taylor. That was amazing. Every time I hear that presentation, even though I work here, I feel like I learn something new each time, even if it's something small. So they do a great job. I thank them. It's a hard act to follow, so I'll do my best. All right. So I feel like I'm going to kind of somewhat reiterate what you guys have already done a really good job at. The blissful part of going last in a presentation is you get a chance to do a little research and take some notes. So I took a few minutes to look at your EPO website, and Fran, I have to say that you and your company and the people who helped you, you guys have done a fantastic job. That is a phenomenal website with a wealth of information. I'm super happy to see all the pet resources on there as a former employee of Animal Services for 15 years and performing a lot of emergency preparedness fairs for animal services. It's very nice to see that step taken. I was also really impressed with your get to know your neighborhood and the resident resources for new people moving in. One of the things we always tried to push in the past was getting to know your neighbors, learning their resources and learning what their skill sets are and having that located somewhere, because you never know what somebody's capable of to help in a situation such as an emergency or disaster. So just my hat's off to you. Great job. I don't know how much better I can do. You guys have already done a fantastic job, but let's talk about it anyways. So obviously, all the things that come to mind when you think about emergencies or disasters. And I want you guys to remember a lot of the stuff on your websites. And of course, we always think the big scale things, earthquakes and fire, the big stuff that's going to take us out. Please remember when you're planning for disasters and emergencies, it's not always the big stuff. Sometimes it's the little things that can turn into big stuff, a gas leak, a flood, a broken pipe, all of these things, you falling down, breaking a hip, hurting yourself. These are all things that can be emergencies or disasters, depending on if you're living alone, if you're with people, anything that affects your life in an adverse way can be an emergency or a disaster for anyone. So it's good to think big scale, but you can also bring it in small scale as well. The whole reason why we plan, obviously, is we want things to be less stressful and less traumatic for you, not just for you, anyone who lives in your household. Some people deal with really bad anxiety. They have really high stress levels. They may take medication for this. Planning and being prepared ahead of time will help with that trauma and that stress during those situations. Also for your animals, it's a really big thing to be prepared and have your animals prepared. I saw that in your resources on your EPO website, you talked about having crates and carriers. Those are fantastic to have. Please remember to practice letting your animals lay in those crates. Just from my background, I know that if your animals do have to go to an emergency animal sheltering situation, they are not going to be able to sleep with you in your cot or your bed where you're at. They're going to have to stay in that crate for hours at a time. Could be 16, 18, could be more until they get walked or let out to go to the bathroom. Make sure that they can handle that. Make sure that that situation is something they can actually handle, staying in that crate for that amount of time. So it's really easy. I know it sounds really easy, right? 1, 2, 3. That's all I want you guys to think about. When you start going to CERT and things like that, you tend to become what I call a disaster junkie. And people they get really excited about this. And I think that's great. But when I used to teach CERT, people would come back after the first class and they would have a whole backpack full of expensive supplies, like a $400 Leatherman knife and all these great things they found at the store. And that's awesome, but you don't have to spend all that money right away. Okay, there's a lot of things you can do that are very simple and they don't cost a lot of money. Number one is locate 2 places where you can safely evacuate with your family and your pets. 2, putting a kit together. And 3, creating a buddy system. These 3 steps right there will get you pretty much everywhere you need to be for emergency preparedness, and then you can build on it from there. So thinking of places you can go with your family and your pets, please keep in mind that most hotels are not pet friendly. Granted, during emergencies and disasters, it's very rare for a hotel to turn people away with animals because it doesn't look very good on the news. But make sure you keep a list of the friendly pet places you can go. You can go to a family or friend's home if you have an RV or trailer and you know some campgrounds. Also, Red Cross shelters, please be aware, not all Red Cross shelters are going to allow animals. Now, that was in the past. I know that they've opened up a lot more. There still are situations where if you have people with allergies or other issues that they may put you in separate areas, but just know that not all the time will a Red Cross shelter allow an animal inside. When we're talking about go kits, these are all some really nice pictures of ways to pack up your emergency supplies. Please keep in mind when looking at this, can you carry it? I know of some folks that came to a training and they went home and they had this really cool chest in their garage, and it was like a 4-foot chest, like a big long thing. And they just stacked it full of stuff, and they were in their mid 30s, maybe early 40s. And once they got done, they couldn't lift it between the 2 of them. So think about how you're packing your supplies. Can you carry it? Are you going to be able to lift it? Is it movable? It's no good to have a go kit and emergency supplies if you can't carry them out when you evacuate. So these are just some ideas of things you can use. If you've got an old suitcase around the house that you don't like to travel with anymore, but the zippers still work fairly well, use that. Get something with some rollers, something that's easy to get out to your car so you can leave. I'm not going to go through this whole list of things with you because this is the kind of stuff that's dime a dozen. You can Google this stuff anytime you want. But the most important thing on this, obviously, is make sure you've got some masks, especially during wildfire, since we're focusing on that. You want to make sure that you protect your breathing. We suggest the N95 mask. They say food and water, definitely water. Just know that when you get to a shelter situation, there's going to be food. There's always going to be food. So it'll come. If you can pack a few snacks, especially if you have diabetes or low glucose problems, then yes, definitely. But don't worry so much about that stuff. Do the stuff that you really need, your medications, any kind of batteries, paperwork, things like that, the really important stuff, especially your insurance paperwork, things of those sorts. Keep those things with you. But if you don't have 7 days worth of food, don't freak out. You'll be fed. It'll be okay. When you're making those go kits, think about where you're going to put them. It's great to have one, but it doesn't do you any good if you put it in the garage and your garage collapses and you can't get to it. Okay. I know one year I bought emergency preparedness kits for my entire family and my mom put hers in the attic, which doesn't do very well when you need to evacuate very quickly. How are you going to get in the attic? So at home, make sure you keep it near a closet or somewhere near an exit, wherever your exit points are. And as you guys know, hopefully you should always have 2 ways out of your home. Put it somewhere near an exit where you can grab it quickly and go. If it's at work, obviously just prepare for about 24 hours or so. And you should also have one in your car. And the car one's going to be a little bit different than your home one, but it's good to have one of these everywhere, just in case. Can't be too prepared. Step 3 is your buddy system. Okay, so ideally you want to try and have 2 people that live nearby, preferably with different schedules. If you can, you don't want them on the same schedule because you want to make sure that if you have one person, if you have both 2 people that work 8 to 5 and they're your buddies and you're at work 8 to 5, who's going to go check on your animals if there's a fire or an earthquake? So maybe if you know somebody that works nights or you know someone that's up early in the mornings, try and have those schedules a little bit separate. Also, something that Red Cross always taught us was try to have an out-of-state contact for check-in with your family. During a disaster, people calling in, it's going to flood the phone lines and you're not going to be able to get a call usually inside where the disaster zone is, but you can call out. Usually the lines are open and they're easier to get out. So if you have an out-of-state contact, make sure your whole family knows that. Even if you have family that live in other parts of the country, just so they know that if something happens to you, you're going to call Uncle Ned in Nebraska and you're going to check in and let everybody know that you're okay. Their buddies must have a key to your home. They should know how to get in safely. So it has to be somebody you trust. They need to know where your kits are located. They should know your emergency and out-of-state contact as well. And if you have pets, they should know your pets, obviously, and be comfortable with them. Another situational thing that I can share with you is I have a friend that has a very large Mastiff boxer mix named Louie. Louie is 120 pounds of some days I like you and some days I don't. And there's no rhyme or reason, but he knows his people he likes. So I am my friend's disaster buddy because Louie loves Auntie Noelle, but Louie doesn't like other people very much. So I have to go get Louie in a situation like that. So possible buddies can be your neighbors, your family, your close friends, a pet sitter, anyone you trust. It could be your hairdresser. My mom is super close with her hairdresser. I don't know. She'd probably ask her to go check on her house for her. It's whoever you trust that you can allow into your space. You want to make sure you have that plan in case you're not at home, of course, and define the tasks. This is all about planning, right? So who's going to do what, when, where, and how? And make sure that you're all understanding of that. There was a really funny episode. I don't know if anybody in the 300 people that are out there have ever watched Seinfeld, but there was a whole episode where everybody had each other's keys and then they got mad at each other and they swapped keys and then the keys got all mixed up. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure everybody knows who's who in the zoo and who's doing what. So this slide right here is how to prevent or reduce fire injuries and death. It's just some of the things you need to think about if you're living alone. Also at the bottom in the blue, you're going to see another slide very similar to this. This is us highlighting our home fire safety assessment. either myself or Inspector King or Inspector Giddis even can go out and come to your home and do a walkthrough and see if there's anything that looks like it's a hazard. Do you have a lot of throw rugs that are, you know, the ears or the ends are coming up and they're a tripping hazard? Are you storing too many things in front of an exit? All those things. We can come into your home and kind of give you some advice on how to clear things up, make sure you have good egress at 2 exits in your place, and even things like if you have too many items plugged into one outlet. Just simple things like that that you may not have thought of, or maybe somebody you know may not have thought of. And it's somebody you care about, but they don't want to hear it from you. And I say that very sensitively because I had a gentleman call and his wife was absolutely against any kind of fire safety. And he called me to see if I could talk to his wife to talk her into it. So you may have that situation. Let us be bad cops. We can do that. We'll be good and bad. We'll be doing good things, but you know, we can help you out with that. So obviously living alone can make escaping from a fire more difficult if they need assistance, hearing, mobility, vision impairments, medications that can cause drowsiness and difficulty walking. I have a 90-year-old grandfather who just took some medicine that the doctors didn't know was going to make his heart rate drop, and he fell in the middle of the night and cracked his collarbone. Pay attention to those things. If you don't feel good, please let somebody know right away. Memory lapses, problems focusing, all of these things lead to higher cause of injuries or deaths. So these are things we want to pay attention to. Don't be scared, be prepared, right? That's what this is all about. Practice your escape plans. I noticed on your EPO website that you guys do drills in your different neighborhoods or your different mutuals. I think that's great. If you're doing those drills, please make sure you try doing some at night. I don't know if you do that already. I'm not going to assume, but if you haven't, do some in the evening. Do it when it's dark. Practice those things because things are, you know, it's a lot different walking around in the dark, you know, using flashlights or headlights or cell phone lights even than it is to walk during the day when you got blue skies and everything's, you know, hunky-dory. Always make sure you have a phone next to your bed and within reach. Please keep some hard-soled slippers or shoes next to your side of the bed. This is more for earthquakes and things like that. If there's broken glass, obviously you don't want to walk over that. If you need glasses, keep those next to the bed. Keys, hearing aids, just keep within reach so you can grab them quickly. You want to be able to respond quickly. Keep your pathways clear. Try not to stop to gather too many personal belongings. Those things should already be in the go bag. You should already have a plan for that. You don't want to ever stop and take too much time to grab things. If you forgot something, you forgot it. Okay, let it be. Somebody else will get it for you. Smoke alarms. This slide here is to inform everyone. I didn't see it on your website, but I think that we are a good resource to possibly add there. We have a smoke alarm assistance program here at Contra Costa Fire, and I didn't even know about it. And I worked for the county for 15 years, so I was pretty jazzed when I saw that. So our smoke alarm assistance program allows us to go help folks that are 60 years or above, or people that are disabled that are homeowners. If they don't have working smoke alarms in their home, we can come in and we replace them with a 10-year lithium smoke alarm. While we're in the home doing that, we do take a glance around and just kind of make sure everything looks kosher. And if they need any help, we, you know, say, hey, those rugs are a little worn. Maybe we should get some new rugs or remove those, or ask them, would you like us to do a home safety assessment while we're here? So please know that this is a program. I think Rossmoor has this program as well. I believe you have one internally, but I could be wrong. But if you don't, or even if you know somebody outside of Rossmoor that is in our jurisdiction here in Contra Costa County, please let us know. And even if it's out of our jurisdiction, we know other agencies that we can send to those folks to get them smoke alarm assistance. If there's a fire in your home, please don't try to fight the fire yourself. Even when we do trainings on using fire extinguishers and safety, it's a very small fire that a fire extinguisher is going to be able to put out, like the size of a waste can, like a small garbage can. And if I had one here, I'd show you. I do like this. That's about it. That's what your fire extinguisher is going to be able to help you with, small stuff, and it's only going to last for about 30 to 40 seconds. So please don't try and put that out. If it looks like it's out of control, just out, leave. Grab your bag, grab your pets, go. If smoke is present and you can, stay low to the floor as possible. Cover your mouth. Move quickly if you can remember to close doors behind you. If you're in a room and you closed before you doze, which by the way was also on your EPO website, that's awesome. Close before you doze is a great way to stay safe at night. If there's a fire in your home, keeps the smoke out. If you have closed your door and you need to get out, obviously check the door at the back of your hand. If it's hot, just stay put and call 911. Let us know where you are. Use the stairways if you can. Do not use an elevator. And if you're trapped, like I said, just close all the doors between you and the fire, call us and let the dispatchers know where you're located in the home. So these are all the fun sites that I went to gather all this great information. They're here for you. Some of these are already on your EPO website. Some of them may not be, but this is where all this information is gathered from. It takes a village, so we don't all do this alone. And that's my handy dandy presentation for today. Like I said, I think I just reiterated about 90% of what you guys have already done. So fantastic job, and thank you for.
Thank you, Noelle. I would just like to also add that the preparedness that she recommended for nighttime drills also counts because recent years have shown that we're experiencing more public safety power shutoffs from PG&E, and awareness and preparation and planning in advance of any kind of event, whether an earthquake, wildfire, or any other kind of emergency incident that could occur, is exacerbated by a lack of power. Without lights, without access to all the other kinds of facilities within the house that you might normally have access to with power, if you don't practice that without power or in the dark, you're not getting the full experience of preparation. And I would also just like to say that that concludes our prepared presentations, and I think we're ready to turn it back over to you, Tom.
All right, great. Thanks, George, to you and your fine crew. Sorry, we had those microphone issues. Always something happens in these kinds of things, but thanks again. I really appreciate it. So we have a lot of questions, more than we can answer. And so we're going to go through them. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to email me and then I will respond. I'll get it out to the right person to answer. And my email is tcashon, my name's right on the screen, CASHION @rossmoor.com. And hopefully we'll get to most of them. We will get to most of them, but there are several we're not going to get to just because of timing. So Carla, do you want to kick us off on our questions?
Sure, and thank you everyone. It looks like there's still 350 people still on this session. That's wonderful. We have about 50 questions. As Tom said, we are not going to get to all of them. 50 is a lot in 20 minutes, but we've kind of grouped them. So we're going to go by group and answer questions that are similar to each other. So we're going to start at the highest level. A question someone asked was, what are other high wildfire risk senior communities in California doing to reduce their wildfire vulnerability and promote resiliency following major wildfires?
Well, I don't know. We have Rossmoor in our community. We deal with other senior care facilities, but none at the scale of Rossmoor. I think our presentation here is comprehensive in both the areas of wildfire preparedness that are important to anybody living in an urban interface area. But specifically in this case, for this presentation, the recommendations that we have are the best information that we can provide to the community of Rossmoor based on the unique positioning of Rossmoor in the hills and due to the unique character of Rossmoor and the residents there. So I'm not sure what other communities at similar risk are doing, but I would be willing to provide other information or learn more about other communities' preparedness as we can find out.
Another high level question. What are the chances of fire getting into Rossmoor?
I think it was rightly identified early in the presentation. I believe it was Mr. O'Keefe who said that last year there were 3 events. Fires have occurred in Rossmoor every year. We experience fires on an annual basis. There have been cases where human-caused activity causes fire. There are structure fires that can escape into vegetation. There are fires that are made worse, whether they're structure fires or vegetation fires based on environmental factors. It's the fires that occur that blow into the community that allow fire to gain speed, moving through fuel, vegetation as it burns closer to houses that are of concern. So I think the bottom line, I think Inspector King identified that we can respond to and extinguish the vast majority of fires that occur, to the extent that maybe even residents of the community aren't aware that the fires are occurring. But we do have fires on an annual basis.
I think that leads to another set of questions that I'm going to call, whose jurisdiction is it? There are a lot of questions around, especially around vegetation and fuel or for fires are in and around Rossmoor. And so there's a number of questions of like, well, who takes care of this? So if there are branches or landscaping that are near a Rossmoor unit, whose jurisdiction is it to abate those potential hazards?
I'll go ahead and answer that. So the short answer is that it depends, but as a very general rule, the property owner is responsible for those things. In everybody here's case, that translates to the mutual or the project. So if there are branches that are hanging over your roof, if there are certain types of vegetation you're concerned about, if there are fire abatement items that you think are not being taken care of, those are all items that the mutual are responsible for covering. So if you are in mutual 1 or 2, in other words, the very biggest of mutuals, and you see something along those lines, particularly branches, you can call that straight to the work order desk, and we will send an arborist out to go ahead and take care of that. If you live in one of the smaller mutuals or any of the projects, you'll want to contact your landscape representative, and they can authorize us to go ahead and cut back branches to 10 feet or remove certain shrubs or do certain fire abatement that maybe hasn't routinely been done already. So the short answer to that question is the mutuals and the projects are responsible for that work, and you should contact your landscape representative and we will work with them to get that done as soon as possible.
What about vegetation around hiking trails or in the hills around Rossmoor, including the fire roads? Whose jurisdiction is it to abate some of those fuels?
So the vast majority of the hiking, well, actually all the hiking trails are on GRF property. And so we do manage those through GRF. And I did see that there was a question, which I would love to hear George's input on, regarding, fallen debris in the open spaces, primarily fallen trees. So what we do is we will go and we will cut up downed trees and, the leaves and the branches and stuff as small as we can get it. And then we will leave it in place to decompose. And this is for a couple of reasons. For one, it's good for stability. Another is that it feeds the soil. And the third is that it's extraordinarily and prohibitively expensive to haul all of that material out of there. But if there is a different method that CAL FIRE or CONFIRE or George or anybody thinks is something else that we should be doing, I am more than happy to hear it. And we will do our best to secure the funds to be able to do that.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. And I think what you're doing is consistent with our standards and our expectation. So just to start on the big picture, for the open space areas that surround Rossmoor, when you get into Las Trampas and some of the open space areas, we just consider that to be open space uncontrolled vegetative fuels. That we can't start regulating every down tree. We can't start looking at every configuration of fuels that might be problematic, because there would be no end to doing the work. And the limited value of doing that, as we discussed earlier, the weather and topography are in some cases driving considerations to fire behavior, not just the fuels. The defensible space standards and weed abatement are focused on areas where we know that we're going to need help fighting a fire by controlling vegetation. Part of that is dealing with down trees, and our standard identifies a 3-inch diameter for cutting or removing everything that's smaller than 3 inches and leaving and neatly stacking everything larger than that in place. That's not 100% safe, partly because, especially if it's on a hill, if everything around that stacked material starts to burn, it can dislodge that, and rolling material on slopes during a fire is a big hazard for firefighters it can also propagate fire through those areas. So there's no perfect solution, but I think the reasonable approach is what Rebecca identified as Rossmoor's approach.
There were a number of questions on how a fire might be spotted in the middle of the night and then communicated to residents who are at risk in the middle of the night. Could you speak to a little bit about how you may spot that from Confire's perspective?
Sure. Well, this is a concern. There have been fires that have occurred in the middle of wildland areas that start in the middle of the night that aren't detected until the sun comes up and people can see smoke. And even in that case, it's still difficult to locate what's actually on fire. Fires that occur in the middle of the night are getting some help from technology. There are, in the last few years, a lot of resources from state and federal government that allow for remote detection during nighttime hours of fires in open space areas. That's an evolving technology. PG&E is working in combination with some of the state and federal resources to increase the capabilities of the fire cameras. There are cameras that are positioned throughout the state that can help fire managers identify fires early on and respond quickly to those. So that technology assisting with the detection of fire throughout our area is improving, but it is still a concern and it's still something we have to work on.
Another more specific question around the risk of wildfire is the drought that is looking to be fairly severe in the Bay Area. How do you plan to fight fire during a drought? How does that work?
Well, the two questions that come up related to drought conditions are, does it make the fire behavior worse, essentially? And the second question is, will there be enough water to fight fire? And to answer the first question fairly directly, when you hear firefighters talking about early onset extreme fire behavior or active or aggressive fire behavior conditions and drought, or when I refer to historically low fuel moistures, what that really does is accelerate what we might expect in terms of fire behavior earlier in the season. When we reach around the beginning of August on an annual basis, fuel moistures drop and they continue to drop until about the 1st of August when everything gets very low, about as low as it gets, and stays low. So when we have drought conditions, fuel moistures just are accelerated in their drying out. So we experience more aggressive fire behavior earlier in the season. In terms of water available for fire protection, water is available through the public mains as it is to every available residential, commercial use, agricultural use. The change to available water for firefighting hasn't been affected by any of the extreme drought conditions we've experienced, including the 8-year drought that ended probably about 5 years ago. Water for firefighting has not been a concern. However, there is contingency planning to use water from the bay, from other water sources in the event of a fire, and wildland firefighting often doesn't even depend on water. There are ways, as both Inspector Giddis and King were referring to, of depriving fire of fuel as a means of fire control. So the drought conditions have a couple different effects on fire issues, but both for fuel moistures and water for firefighting, I think we're prepared.
So I'm going to give George here a break from questions, and we're going to move over to more of the evacuation and preparedness questions, and there were a number of them. What is the evacuation plan for Rossmoor? Essentially having one road in, one road out for 10,000 residents. So there's a number of us that can answer this question, but I'm gonna start with Tom, and then we'll go to PD, and then I can jump in as well.
Yeah, great question. We get this a lot. So just to give you a little bit of a background, GRF hired a fire consultant about 1.5 years ago in creating our first or an updated emergency preparedness or an emergency operation plan, an EOP, and that is on our website. If you go to rossmoor.com, you'll see at the bottom is our EOP if you want to read it. And in there, it talks about emergency zones. And what these are, they're broken up throughout the valley in different areas. And if there is ever an emergency, what police and fire are going to do is they're going to evacuate the closest to the threat. And then they're going to start moving away from that. There will never be an evacuation order for all of Rossmoor. It just won't happen. It's too dangerous. When that happens, that means everything else has failed and there's nothing else we can do. And we're all pretty much in danger. That's not going to happen. I mean, could it happen? Yeah, anything could happen. Likely? No. So if you look at those zones, you'll see that we have both the number of people in each zone, and then we have a location, and then we also have mitigation parts where we would put traffic enforcement or areas or choke points that would alleviate those choke points so that we can get as many people quicker out of that zone. And then obviously it's out through the gate. We have one way in, one way out. Police and fire will determine whether or not to change the direction of lanes. We always have to have one lane coming in though for emergency vehicles. We do have access points throughout the valley. We have a total of 9. Those are for those fire trucks, the dozers, and everything else that the fire department needs in order to fight the fires. So that's how we kind of do it. And as far as notification, just so everybody knows, we have many ways. We have channel 28, we have Nixle, and then as we go down to even the part where, you know, the police department will use their public address systems on the vehicles, all the way down to actually knocking on doors, banging on doors in order to evacuate people. And now I'll give it to Lieutenant Mangini and Sergeant Hibbs. They probably have more.
Well, just a little bit to pile on about the concerns about that one way in and one way out. If I could blend that a little bit with what the Confire was talking about defendable areas. Yes, you have only one way in and one way out, but it's extremely defendable against fire. It's a very wide paved road with your fuel sources actually sunk off to the side. So we can open and close those lanes as much as necessary if we actually really need to get mass people out of there, and we will if that's what we need to do. But as Tom said, and I will reiterate, the likelihood of having to evacuate mass people actually all the way out of Rossmoor is very slim. What you can do to be more prepared for an evacuation incident is prepare yourself. Know what your multiple exit routes and whatnot from your houses are. And as, oh golly, I forgot her name. She did a great job. Help me out, Tom. Noelle was saying, know where you're going to go. Have a couple places picked that you can go. Of course, listen to direction if emergency services like police and fire are telling you to go elsewhere because of a danger or whatnot. But if there is nobody telling you something and you sense danger, you don't have to wait for us. If you think you're in danger and you have an exit route planned, use that exit route and keep yourself safe. So you're actually the best person to prepare for your own egress from your residence, and just know your multiple routes and be prepared for that. Tom Cashon covered the various alert services. We also do have robocalls from the police department to landlines. So that is another service that we use in incidents like this. And you can actually get an alert on your home phone if you don't have a mobile with Nixle or Everbridge.
Heather, do you want to, I think that just set you up right there to come in and tell a little bit about the CWS.
Sure. So my name's Heather Tiernan. I manage the community warning system for the county. So that's the countywide emergency notification system that we use. Just one clarification, we actually don't use Everbridge and Nixle. There's a lot of local emails and some stuff that can come out on the Nixle system, but our system is different. So if you want to register for those emergency alerts, you just need to, there's a couple ways you can do that. So you can go to our website. Our website, this area right here will normally have, it will have an alert if there's any alert in the entire county. It's a good place to see if something's going on if you're not sure. But if you want to register for alerts, you can click registration right up here. And it will take you to our registration page. So you can click there and you can do it on our system online. If that's not good for you, you can click this link right here that says registration form. it will give you a paper version. You just print it out and mail it back to us if that is better for you. So that's the way that you register for our emergency alerts. This is how we're going to send alerts on your landline phone. We already have access to those phone numbers. When you register, you're registering your cell phone, your text message, and your email. It's really important to do that. None of the technologies are perfect, so you want to make sure you're registering as many devices as you can. If you need help with registering, call us. Our phone number is also on our website. The other tools that we have available that we can use, we do post on, like I mentioned, we post alerts on our website, and we use social media. One of the best things about using social media is that the news, all the news channels are looking at that. And so they see a lot of our stuff there and they'll start talking about it on the news. And it's got a map of the emergency so people can see where the emergency is. And then finally, the last tool that we have available is some of the federal level tools. So the emergency alert system, that's the original emergency notification tool. It's where it goes on the TV and the radio and it makes the sound and then the message plays on the bottom. I can activate that if it's a large scale emergencies. I can also activate the wireless emergency alert. So that's the one that comes on your cell phone and makes a really, really loud sound, and it's a very short message. And then if you try to click on it or anything, it's gone. So it's great. It doesn't require you to register for anything, but it's not the best message that we have. Sometimes it just goes away if you click on it, and that can be confusing, which is why it's important to register also. That'll be loud and wake you up and will get your attention, but then our message will really get across to you. We have one thing that I want to mention quickly. We know a lot of people say, well, I don't keep my phone on at night, or I put my phone on silent or something like that. One of the things that you can do is you can save our caller ID in your phone, and you can save it to your emergency bypass. And that means that when you do that, even if your phone's on silent or if your phone's on do not disturb, it still has to be on. If it's on silent or do not disturb, it'll still come through and ring with the phone call and make the text message sound. So I sent instructions on how to do that to Tom so he can distribute to the group, because I don't really want to go into all that boring stuff right now. But it's a really good way to save that and just be confident that you're going to get that alert, even if you put your phone on silent at night. And then there was some questions sort of about like how evacuations will work. We speak directly with the incident commander in the field. So if the incident commander tells us they need to go this direction, this road isn't good, tell them to go to this location, whatever they tell us, we're going to put in the message. Sometimes that stuff changes very quickly. You know, they can get out there and they're going to help direct traffic and stuff like that. But if they say this road is closed because a tree fell down or whatever it is, we'll talk to them and we'll put that in our message in the beginning about what to do and where to go. We put as much information in the message as we can to make sure that people know what they need to do and like really how to do it, not just get out of my house. So I think that is probably a really quick down and dirty answer to a couple of those questions. And I'll turn it back to the questions.
And just one other thing I just want to throw on there. If you don't feel comfortable here because you see smoke, or you don't feel comfortable because there's a red flag warning, by all means, feel free to leave. There's nothing that says you have to wait until you're told to evacuate. You can self-evacuate yourself. And that's what they found in Paradise and some of the other communities that had big fires, is that people were nervous, but they're waiting for someone to tell them to leave. If you don't feel comfortable, please just go ahead and leave. Do your plan wherever you plan to go. But you can leave whenever you don't feel comfortable. You don't have to wait to be told to leave. Okay, Carla?
So I think a few questions that I saw, and these will, I know we're almost at time, but I wanted to make sure we got to them. When are we planning a evacuation drill? And I think, you know, we've gotten a lot of information today about plans and making plans. And as we all know, practice makes perfect. We don't want to be exercising the plan for the first time in the middle of an emergency. And know that the City of Walnut Creek, GRF, the county, OES, Fire, our police department. We have a team together that has done tabletop exercises kind of internally to practice some of these things that are unexpected. So Heather talked about, evacuating and then something comes up, a downed tree, or maybe the wind turns or something like that. We are practicing those internally. We did have a live evacuation, a small scale evacuation drill planned in Rossmoor last year around March. And then, as we all know, COVID hit and it was no longer safe to get people together and evacuate. So we are planning to do something like that when it is safe again. And it looks like, we're seeing the light at the end of this COVID tunnel. So that will be coming soon. So look for information about that. And this includes practicing evacuation with folks with special mobility needs, oxygen, things like that. So we are thinking about all of those needs in the Rossmoor community. So I know we are at time, so I will hand it back to Tom.
Hey, Tom, I had just one other quick comment about the CWS. I just want to tell everybody our system is not used as liberally as most other systems. We really only use it for real life emergencies. So we've got a lot. Walnut Creek has a Nixle system that they do send informational emails about. So if you register and you don't hear from us about the traffic or the whatever, that's not wrong. We only use our system for like life-threatening emergencies. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that so they knew what they were registering for. We're not going to spam you. Hopefully you never hear from us. But yeah, it's just for life-threatening emergencies.
Good information, Heather. That was really good. Yeah, we're running out of time, but I do want to give Fran a little opportunity just to talk about EPO, and then I'll finish it up and we will be done. So Fran, it's yours.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for inviting Rossmoor Emergency Preparedness Organization to participate on the panel today. We are a 30-plus-year-old volunteer resident organization here in Rossmoor. We have about 400 members. We have coordinators and teams that span across many of our entries and our streets without entries. Our singular core mission is to help our neighbors accept their sole responsibility to prepare themselves and their households for a disaster or an emergency that impacts Rossmoor. We do, as you have noted, we do have a rossmoorepo.org website. It is targeted for our Rossmoor community. It's targeted, obviously, for seniors and for the issues that particularly face us when we face disasters and emergencies. I encourage residents here to go to that site, and our homepage at the bottom has got Heather's site. You can sign up right there. We've got Rossmoor Nixle's link. You can sign up there. If you're not on Rossmoor Nixle, you should be. We also, I want to throw into the mix, Rossmoor EPO encourages residents here during fire season, which I guess is becoming fire year these times, to keep their gas tanks, if they're driving a gasoline powered car, keep that gas tank at least a half, I say 3/4 full through the fire season. If we get a red flag day, then pay particular attention to where your go bag is. If you have not prepared a go bag as a resident, go to our site. We have many tip sheets on how to get a go bag together for each member of your household and for the pets that you have in your household. There was a recent study put out by the Journal of Public Health on older Americans and emergency preparedness, which shocked me. Only 20% of 65-plus Americans report being ready for a disaster and emergency. And I, as the president of EPO, am going to take the challenge on and hewing to Tom's new hashtag, Safer Rossmoor. We want to make sure that more than 20% of our residents are ready for a disaster emergency that hits here in Tice Valley. Let me tell you the people, the theys who are not coming, my fellow residents. They are not coming to bring you the water, the food, the medications, and the personal items you need for a 3-day mandatory or voluntary evacuation from Rossmoor. They're not coming to bring you the food, the water, the meds, and other personal needs you have in case civil authorities should call a shelter-in-place order here and we cannot leave Rossmoor. This is not that hard to get together. The next time you order food or you go to the grocery store, bring home a little extra food for the shelter-in-place supplies you're pulling in, bring the water that you need, grab a gallon of water, bring it home, and put it away for a future disaster emergency. We are, as seniors, we are at the greatest risk for post-disaster mortality and morbidity, and yet here we are the least prepared. So I want to be sure we're oldies, but we're not such good goodies, at least nationwide on this. So let's do what we can to be Rossmoor preppers and begin to get our stuff together. This is going to be a doozy of a fire season. There is no question about it. Globally, it is awful. We have fires up in the Arctic Circle. Global climate change is a major factor in what we're facing here. And we have to work together, but we have to get ourselves prepared. And I want to go through my chain I usually go through. I want to tell you the days who are not coming to give you the food, supply you with the food, the water, and the meds and the other items you need. Golden Rain Foundation is not coming. Public Safety is not coming to give you those items. Securitas is not coming. The mutuals are not coming. The projects are not coming. County Fire may come to help us with fire, but they are not going to bring us the food, water, and meds we need. Walnut City Police Department is not coming. 9/11 is not coming to give us those items. Certainly Rossmoor Area Community Emergency Team, CERT, can't come and do that for us. And I, as the president of Rossmoor EPO and my local EPO neighborhood teams, cannot come to bring you the food, the water, the meds, and the supplies that you need. So it's really imperative as we go into this fire season, which does look to me like it's going to be a doozy, that we do all we can to get prepared. We do have EPO teams, as I said, local teams. If you want to find out who your local team is, go to our website, rossmoorepo.org. My telephone number is at the bottom. I invite anyone who wants to know, or my email is there. If you want to know if you have a local team in place to help you, and we're here 24/7, 365 days. We're in a unique opportunity to be able to help folks who have special needs and to be able to identify them so that we can help Rossmoor residents survive, thrive, and be resilient through any disaster emergency we face in the future. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Tim, for inviting us to be a part of this panel today. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Fran. I appreciate you being here. So in closing, I want to thank Confire for the informative presentation. That was really helpful. You covered a lot of information, and I think we're better because of that. Thanks to the fantastic panel. You brought so much information. I mean, we could go on for hours on this information and talks and questions. So thanks again for being here. I really appreciate it. And then I want to let everyone know Rossmoor is a safe community, and we will continue to make it even safer. You'll see more community presentations, as you've been seeing this year, and articles in the newspaper and other education and preparation regarding wildfires in the coming days, weeks, and months. And this is all just to make Rossmoor even safer, as Fran likes to say. I want to make Rossmoor safer. Thank you again for joining us today, and please, everybody, be safe.